welcome back. It's Christine again with the Artist Pod, and today we're going to do something a little bit different. I am doing a drawing challenge that was posted in one of the Facebook groups I'm in called the Keep Creating Facebook group by BJ Dell. I'll link to that in the Facebook page. One of the members posted this. It's basically, there's 3 separate groups, and you roll the dice to see which animal you get per group. So the 3 animals that I sort of rolled the dice to get were an anglerfish, a snake, and a spider that I've then combined together into one drawing. So yeah, so we'll see how that goes. As always, I'm using a Wacom Intuos Pro tablet, and I'm drawing straight into Photoshop. So let's get arting. Alright, here's the ansnaderfish, this mythical creature here. So, you know, for the most part, the front is just an anglerfish. So when I'm drawing something like this and it's not an actual animal, I do it a little bit more freehand. I'm not as concerned about making sure like everything's perfect because it's a little bit more cartoony. I'm still going to draw it in my same style, but it makes that a little easier to kind of draw out and sketch out, just sort of figure out how it would work. When you're having something descend behind it, like this, you know, it's snake tail, in theory it's like coming off, and then you swoop it over. There's going to be a line here to indicate it's folding over on itself. You swoop it over so you can see that backside, and then you line this line up with the one over here that then swoops back over, line this up with this sort of cut in between, and then swoop that over, and that'll kind of give it that impression that it's, you know, a snake slithering behind it. Of course, because it's also a spider, I have the spider legs coming off of the snake body, and then a big giant anglerfish head with spider eyes, and then little spider, I guess these are also legs, these little things. Otherwise it's just the same. I know it looks kind of crazy, but it should be fun. It was an interesting challenge when I certainly sketched it out several different times before I was happy with the composition. Combining these 3 animals that have, you know, in theory nothing to do with each other. But it's the way we always draw, right? So it's going to be that one stroke, and one in between, going around the eyes and being careful there. Then, of course, we have this thing coming down. Oh, gonna kind of keep within. So this is, right, their little dangle thing. So I have just the hint of it coming up on one side where it'll add that sense of motion where it's not perfectly straight. And then it coming right down, blocking the most of the hint of it going up. And bring that down, always one stroke in front of the other. Be a nice quick sketch. So it doesn't have, well, it could. Spiders have hair. So I could give it some hair. I'm going to give it a little bit, but I'm not planning on making it have hair. Spiders don't have hair. I mean, anglerfish, they have some like wispy things sometimes. But otherwise, they don't really have hair. And snakes obviously don't have hair. So, you know, at this point it's kind of what I want it to look like. Highlights and shadows are always where the magic comes in, so right, so we have this piece kind of coming down. Just making sure to avoid line conflicts, that'll be important too. I'm just sort of sweeping it off to the side with his head. Again, being careful around the eye. Eyes are important. Even though he has like 6 or 8. However many. You know, when you're giving an anglerfish a lot of eyes. I'm anticipating that he's going to look a little, you know, crazy. So I'm not going to show much of that on this side, right? It's sort of popping out on one side, right? You have it coming out on one side over here where this comes up, so I'm not going to really show that same line on the other side. And still drawing that down. The highlights and shadows will help distinguish this line from the areas around it. Because right now, right, when I pull that off, it's hard to see. I mean, you can, but it's harder to see exactly where it is. But, you know, again, like I always say, the magic of drawing comes in the highlights and shadows. That's where, as illusionists, our skill really shines. That's where we'll take, you know, the two-dimensional plane and make it appear, give it the illusion that it's three-dimensional. So it doesn't really matter how your sketch starts, right? I have this crazy creature that's not real. Although a good composition, you know, there's something to be said for that. But highlights and shadows are where you'll take this creature that doesn't exist and we'll make it real. Normally I don't do this, but I am going to do this. His lips, I'm going to turn my strokes the other way. Just because it'll be easier. And he has this sort of thicker side of the mouth. Go back a couple. And I chose this specific color because snakes, spiders, and anglerfish can all be this color, so it seemed like a good middle color to kind of choose. And we're just going to go all the way around and just run them into each other. It's a harder angle for me to draw right through here. Just like swoop up. We'll make it work. Alright, so there's the basics of the anglerfish. We'll give his fins a little love, but they're going to be more translucent at the end. Now we have the snake body. Right, you can kind of see how it curves up here, right? So that's where these lines would be coming up. And then going straight. So you kind of want to mimic what's happening around it, right? So we have these guys coming up and over. You want to loop that, right? So I want all these lines to go in the direction of the contours. Right, so this is coming back down. This is kind of running into the face, but you can see how that loops where the spider leg loops. Again, I may make the spider legs a little bit more hairy. But you can still do that. Or maybe add some sporadic bits of hair throughout his body. That's another option. So this is looping back up, so we kind of want that edge to have a loop to it, because it's, you know, it's swooping up as it goes back from our perspective, just that little bit. So anytime you're doing something like that, you know, to help create that illusion, you can swoop it up like this, because in theory it's coming, right, this is the first plane, this is that first section of the body, and then it's going to twist the other way. And we have certainly the legs are blocking some of that, but, and then this is coming straight back the other way. And then we have another leg here blocking it. And this leg is behind the first plane. Right, just coming up and starting to turn right here. Debating about light source. Obviously his little dingle will give some light, but I don't know. The last time because I've drawn anglerfish and I've drawn spiders and I've drawn snakes before. And in my experience, especially with the anglerfish, when I did have the light source coming from here, in theory, the reason I don't think that will work is it's so light source is the body's going to get lost, because on a light source like that, it gets relatively extreme. By the time you get to even the edge of the anglerfish, the light would be tapering off. So probably going to have two light sources. So that'll be interesting to talk about and shadow for, which means I'll shadow for the dominant light source first, which won't be his dangle. And then I'll shadow, add in some highlights for the little dangle piece. I don't know what it's called. His little light. His face light. I don't know. There we go. You can see it right in the way the snake body's twisted, but if you're looking at it and you think, gosh, that doesn't quite look right, then you can certainly also readjust how it's coming together. You know, maybe this should be a little bit more extreme there, whatever, but you can see, looks like it sort of loops over itself, which is good. It's what we want it to do. Alright, and we're on this side, same thing. We're going to get his little spider leg first. Right, so this is still just a sketching step, because what I'm doing is, one, I'm if there were fur on it, I'd be making sure that the lines would be going in the direction that the fur's going. But if there's not fur, then I'm making sure the lines are going and following the contour of the body, and making sure that there's no line conflicts, and that's important. Line conflicts can show up, and you can see them in when I've done it. And there have been times, and there are compositions I've done when you can see that there are some line conflicts with how I've drawn something in one or two spots, and so I try to avoid that as much as I can, because it is something that will show up and will be noticeable. And if I can see it, other people can see it. And maybe not everybody would notice it, but at the end of the day, that's my metric. If I notice that something's wrong, other people can notice that something's wrong. And then it just becomes a question of, do you think it's detracts from the composition, or if it's fine enough that it doesn't, and the composition itself is still solid. Because I've been pretty late in the game on drawings, gone pretty far with it when I realized that something just wasn't working, and I could see that there was an issue and I had to change something. So that can happen where you're pretty far along. So I try to get ahead of problems, and this is one of the ways I do that. I'm avoiding line conflicts by setting myself up to hopefully not have them. And sort of pre-planning, because this will give me an idea of how it's going to look. Is it going to look good once it's all together? And then I just have to, get the highlights and shadows in place. But it's just like drawing, any animal. It's just, there's a little bit more freedom, because you're not bound by exactly how any of these animals look. I'm certainly taking elements, and I'm certainly mindful of how, spider legs look when they come up, and I'm mindful about the general idea of what anglerfish look like, having drawn them before. I will say I find it easier to draw like this, where it's a little bit more freeform, especially after I've drawn an animal, but anytime really. This is a little easier than trying to draw and make sure all the proportions are correct and the eyes are the right distance apart and things like that. So to me, drawing a non-realistic animal is a little easier than drawing something completely real, but it might also be because I have drawn these animals before. So none of these are animals that I haven't drawn. And I'm not going to do it, and you can kind of see it in my sketching, I'm not going to do the snake scales. I have done that in the past, but that is a hard thing to do. It takes a lot of time, basically, to draw snake scales. And then again, we're looping it down. Right, there's that angle as it comes up. Also being mindful of how my loops are going. Right, I'm angling them up every time. I'm angling them this way or this way. I'm not angling them this way because this indicates it's rounding down, but because of how I'm drawing, I'm rounding it up. Okay, now this thing at the end is a rattle. I sort of threw it on there. I can do a normal snake tail. I just wasn't certain what I was going to do. I don't know if an anglerfish would want a rattle since it's, you know, hunting, but maybe it would. We can do the rattle. Obviously this was very roughly sketched in. I'm going to change the direction though. I'm going to have it coming from up and down, and I'm only going to do it just past the edge of the tail. And we can fix it as we get, once we take the sketch layer off. Now, there is some white, not only for this, although I wonder, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go ahead and start a new layer and have the dangle thing be, I'm still going to do it in white, but add in some of the color of his skin. I bet it has it. It's just because it's illuminated, we can't see it very clearly. Okay. And then teeth are white. The dangle would have some white on it, or teeth, we're just going to come up here and make nice and crazy. They have very like thin wispy teeth that add to how scary they look. They're very cool. Interesting fish. Well, especially the, gosh, I have to remember what I call it every time, the ansnader fish. And then highlights and shadows will allow us to kind of disappear further back as we go. I don't really know if their teeth would wobble this way, but it seemed like a cool effect to add, so I did it. I don't think I did it on the other side. That same thing with the teeth, you know, it's just these long strokes. I'm typically putting one in front of another. Everything typically has texture to it, and this is it doesn't create texture. It creates great effect for fur by interspersing lines like that, even though this guy doesn't have a whole lot of it. There's a lot of spiky, crazy spiky teeth. And different lengths, right? Their teeth are not the same length, as opposed to some animals, well, there'll be a little bit more uniformity. There's not as much uniformity here, from what I remember of drawing one. They also, they do have teeth that kind of go further and further back. So when I get to shadowing the mouth, I am thinking about adding some of that in. We'll see kind of how it goes once I get there. Especially depending on the light source and what light source is picking up what. I mean, I certainly wouldn't want to see this guy come at me. And if I'm giving him a light source, maybe he can survive on land and sea. Got spider legs after all. Why would he need that unless he can crawl? a little past the edge. I might have to take the select tool and undo the edge of the teeth here. I'm going just past the edge of his lip, so not exactly what I'm intending to do. It's just kind of how it's working. So I might have to like just take like the lasso tool and quickly erase some of it out, line it back up right. That's a relatively easy fix. Although I prefer not to do that. It's not horrible if I do. You can do it once it's highlighted as well. Okay. There's our cute little guy. He also has some white on the end of his fins. Keep forgetting about that part. Just finishing both of these out. Okay. So light source. I'm actually gonna fix something real fast. I'm gonna make this a little thicker. Not much, just a little, like a hair thicker. Because there's some substance, you want just that little bit. You don't want it like a hairline around his mouth. That will look a little weird. It's already pretty thin, but they do have like the little bulge of some lips coming up and over. And straightening out any lines that are really out of place. Okay. Come down a little better. Alrighty. Okay, so now figuring out a light source and where I want it. Usually I do above and to the right. I'm just debating on if that's a good spot for it. Because we're going to have this center point, and that'll be really highlighting the mouth. Or do I want to go from here first and see what we come up with? Yeah, let's do that center point first, because I know that there will definitely be light coming from here. So, therefore, I might be able to do it without. Okay. All edges will be in shadow, and certainly this little top section will be in shadow. And then as the edges come down, so as I draw shadow, I'm backing off my pin pressure, not putting a ton of pressure here, just sort of lightly, drawing. We're going to have it kind of bursting a little bit up the middle. All edges would be in shadow because I would do a line that's a little off center anyway. Okay, now we're going to have, am I in the right layer? Yeah. Full pin pressure. Let's see the difference there as it comes up the middle. And especially right down in here. That'll really be taken over by white though. We're going to add an extra highlight with the white after we do this. Right, so we're going to bring that up. I'm going to bring this down just a little and have it fading out. Okay. First part of it, I want to make sure around the eyes is nice and clean, so I'm going to go ahead and add a few more lines in. Let's see here. So there probably would be some shadowing on this side of the eyes where it would potentially be rounding into the eye itself. Not a lot. Might be kicking up some highlight on the top before it goes behind the eye, which kind of looks like it's bulging a little. Just debating on if that would be true or not. Probably be some highlight up into here. The mouth would be blocking some. So, and again, right by this side of the eye, a little bit of shadow. On this side, probably some highlight. Kind of the opposite of what we do when the light source is the other direction. And then probably a little bit of shadowing here where that lip is blocking, so it would just follow the edge of the lip. Plus we'd get a shadow where this is blocking. This big dangle thing would certainly be blocking it. But, you know, otherwise, highlight, we need to blend that in. Top of the head would be in shadow once we get there. So this is probably highlight. And this, I would say, a shadow right by the eye again. Take it to the top. Means this would be shadow over here. Same with this guy. Potentially a little better than what I just did. There we go. And on this one, so that light pin pressure. Right, and combined with the fact that that is running into the top of the lip. There probably would be a little bit of shadowing on either side of this guy all the way up. On top of his head would also be in shadow. Depending on if we keep this light source. I just don't think it'll be good enough. Might do enough to illuminate the face, but it won't be enough to illuminate the body. I'm gonna go ahead and decide on a secondary light source, because that's gonna help. We're gonna get to the body quick enough. And so I'm gonna have that above and to the right. As always, it's above and in front of, not behind or next to. It's just a difference on how you're gonna shadow it. So I'll keep that in mind too as I'm shadowing, which means some of what I've already shadowed may be highlight. Now all edges are still in shadow because of where both light sources are. Just won't be as extreme with a secondary light source. So even this side, on the side of the light source, still going to have that shadow against his face. But then the rest of this will potentially be highlight as we bring it down. Including the sections that I shadowed underneath the eye would be offset by the highlight coming down from above. As well as against the lip, actually. That's still going to be in highlight too. But then this back side, because it'll be in shadow from the light source, will now be bound by the light coming from the little light thing. So all of this would be in shadow, but there's potential for some light to be hitting it. Definitely not on this side, but if you get closer towards the mouth. So this clearly turned away, but this starts turning back forward, so you'd have some bleed over happening. So some of this is also needing to determine exactly where highlight and shadow would be changing based on the two light sources. You'd also have, with this, with the light source coming from the way that we have it, there'd be some highlighting all the way up. Right, so it would push that all the way up. Still edges and shadow. Better than what I currently have. I'm just straightening this out a little bit. There would also likely be, from this above into the right light source, shadow from this, but it's not going to attach to this. It's actually going to be offset just a little bit. The further away the object is from the place it's casting the shadow, the further away the shadow will be from that object, right? So I'm going to have it coming out a little bit because, you do have this that it would attach into. And then light source coming from above into the right, so we'll say down here is going to be the shadow for it. So right through that eye, and then this would be highlight. And this is probably highlight, but it's going to be transitioning back into shadow. So you get that, and we can temper off how deep that shadow is over here. Just being careful around the eye. Say there's going to be shadow on this back side of the eye. And then shadow through here. Connecting back into this eye. Whereas this would be highlight. I'm just sort of making sure it's fading nicely into the head, into the top of the head where the shadow is, since the whole thing is the head, I guess. I'm gonna temper this a bit. It doesn't need to be as dramatic. Sort of fading it in. Shadows wouldn't have sometimes they have a clear edge, but they don't have to. You can make it much more subtle. So it's there, but it's going to be there a little bit more. Not good enough yet. There. So it's still there, you can still see it, but it's not as dramatic as it was. Okay, and then continue this on down. There won't be much on the face left after this, right? It's just the lips, which will be interesting because I didn't really give myself a lot of room on the lips to do much with shadows and highlights. But, we'll need to. So then, alright, they're going to have highlight underneath because of this. So all the way around the lips on the inside we'll have some highlight because of the middle, the light source with his own personal light. And then there's going to be light coming in from the other side, at least on this. We can give some shadowing here. Not a lot. We really don't have a lot of wiggle room, which means we won't be able to show it as accurately. And then it starts going underneath. So then that light source backs off on the bottom side, but not on the, what is now the top side on the bottom lip. Same thing here, but I'm going to give this a little bit of a shadow, except underneath where that light source would be. Otherwise kicking up back up top. See, there's just not a lot of room. It's hard to show the details on something like this. And then of course the inside still has that light source, while the back side is in shadow. And then right underneath it as well, versus inside. Again, not a lot of room. working with what we got. Just lightly filling it in. Depends on how fast this goes underneath as well, because there will be some bleed over. I'm just trying to get the shadows fully in place, and then this is gonna come out just a little bit, because now both light sources would be hitting from above against that bottom lip. There's his face. I'm gonna add a little bit. This is pushing out. I'm gonna add a little bit of highlight here. That is more from that source instead of from above and to the right, but just that little bit. Cleaning up some of these edges. Okay. Now, the rest of the body would likely be dictated by the light source above and to the right only. Let me get the fins in though. I think even them, they're far enough back that at this point that dangle, God, I really don't know what to call it, the dangle light. At this point the dangle light won't really be hitting much back here, including these fins. They're off to the side of his head, so his head's blocking, and they're a little bit more behind him. So this is potentially more that upper right light source. Giving this a burst, but this not as much, maybe a little bit, but not as much. Right, so now the singular light source coming from above and to the right. So this side, then shadow. It's turned away from the light source. This is also tricky because this, I mean, all sides are in shadow, but this is also a little bit turned away because of the nature of how it's drawn. And of course you have under the first leg, and they sort of run together. This back side's in shadow because it's going down and again away from the light source. Doing the whole thing in shadow, but I'm going to be fixing it with highlights very, very soon. Right, so we're going to have some highlighting on the knee. And then ultimately the leg as it comes down. And then this one likely, well, there's probably a little bit of highlight, but a lot of it in shadow because you have the face that'll be blocking it. But because the light source is also in front of, there's probably a little bit of highlighting where it catches. Won't be a lot, but it probably is just a little. Maybe like right through here. And then going into shadow. I'm going to do the legs in shadow. There's just, sometimes it's just easier to start in shadow. I know I say this on a lot of videos. It's easier to start in shadow and build in highlight because it can start getting complicated as to what's cutting and where it's cutting. So this gives me a little bit more control, especially when I'm working with a smaller space. I tend to do this. And the snake body is potentially no different because it's a smaller space. It might just be easier to do the whole thing in shadow first. In which case I might as well just do everything in shadow and then worry about the individual pieces after I do it. So just this light pin pressure. Because then all it is deciding where highlight is. There's no worry about filling in shadows. So I've already done it. Sometimes it means that there's double work, but if I have to do it anyway, it's just as easy. Alright, then he has the leg behind here. Again, we're doing all of this in shadow. And the snake body. And, right, just following the direction of the lines I've already drawn. Making sure these edges are straight while I'm doing this. all of this like nice and done and filled in. And then sorting out the highlights. You can see as I come down though, being careful on that edge. Doesn't have to be perfect, but I also don't want like random jagged lines until I decide where I'm going to put the few strands of hair that I'm going to have on him. Till then it's not fur, so can't have him looking too fuzzy. All right. So now it's just a matter of adding highlights. That'll be a little easier. Right, so we have leg here is going to have some highlights. When you're adding highlights to something that's already been shadowed, you don't necessarily need to put a ton of pin pressure. Adding more lines will create a highlight, just like adding less lines will create a shadow. So adding more pin pressure, adding less pin pressure, it all helps to create highlights and shadows. So if I do it this way, where I'm adding the shadow in first, you don't have to put nearly as much pin pressure in order to get, you know, a little bit of highlight going on. So highlight coming all the way up this leg and onto the knee, making sure it's nice and tapered off. Now, there's probably a little bit of highlighting down the arm or leg, whatever it is. Some blocked under here where, right, the leg is blocking the highlight, but it needs to be tapered in. But through here, probably some highlight coming into shadow, and then connecting into the snake body, where there'd be highlight, except underneath. Right, this going into highlight, probably some shadow on this back side. It's away from that light source, but there will be a connection of highlight through some of this. And then highlight, figure out exactly where this line is. Shadow on all sides, so there'd be a shadow here, but probably a highlight almost up to it, fading into it. So highlight through here. As we come underneath this leg, there's going to be some shadowing because the leg is going to cast a shadow. It's at an awkward angle. You can kind of see my strokes get a little weird here. But not through here. So this is still part of that body before you get to the bottom of the arm. Alright, so highlight, and then there's probably some shadowing right under here, which means highlight would be around it. There also is probably some shadowing where the leg is blocking that just a little bit. So you have just under, and then it's going to go up. So that's only going to affect us so much. So this all probably highlight, and then as it goes further out from the body, our highlight will go further out, and then as it comes back down, we'll have probably a little bit of shadowing here. But because it'll be coming back down where the edge is already turning, there'd be shadow there anyway. Right, so filling this in. And then as it rounds underneath, same thing, there's going to be some shadowing as it goes under. Making sure to feather all of this in. And then potentially a little bit of highlight before that leg would have hit. Okay. And then on this side, same thing, we're going to have that highlight. Light source is coming from above and to the right, so it's gonna, that highlight's going to be running right into his head as it tapers on down. and all the way down to that first one, to where the first segment of the snake runs into the second. Probably highlight there all the way down because of the nature of light source coming from above, so it's gonna get right into that. Making sure to match so one doesn't look out of place. Right. And then some highlighting here still until it gets towards that edge, and to bring out the shadow just a little bit. Okay. There's that first segment plus this leg. So shadowing right over here. Again, running that shadow or that highlight into the face, to the shadow on the face. There really isn't anything to fully block that, of course, except the edge as it goes off. Okay. Oh, he's looking interesting. All right. So this is going to be highlight. Leg is far enough away from the body, there shouldn't really be anything to block it. Block the highlight, I should say. Backside in a bigger shadow than the front, but all edges in shadow. And then probably a little bit under, but we do have some of the leg that might be blocking itself. Probably some that won't, though. Temper that off a bit. Now we will have some of the body blocking some of this. So where that's connecting in, might get a little burst of highlight under, but so much as it rounds away. Not adding much, just more strokes. And then over here is probably a little bit of a burst as well, but nothing much as it comes down. That's where that light's coming from above. Still kind of blocked on this side though. Same thing as the others, right? You have that clear line to the leg, but all edges in shadow. Connecting back to this, that probably would have a little burst down its middle as well. And connecting on that center point. Knee getting some love. Guess it's a knee, spider knee. Bringing that down. Connecting it back in to a body that it once again would have a burst way up to the edge. And down until you get near the bottom where it would transition into shadow underneath, and then the edge as well. Bringing that down again, running that highlight into his head, but maybe not as overzealous as I was there. Let's bring that in a little closer without putting a dot on the picture. Okay. Sometimes I'll do it where I go reverse there and then fade that off. And then same thing, fading it off. All right. A little bit of shadowing where the leg bends over itself. And then catching some in here. And then back here, maybe some out this way. With again, potentially the body blocking, although it probably wouldn't at this point. Because the tail's shooting off so much further back. This is probably actually highlight. right? The snake body, which is going just further and further back. It's just a tight perspective, which means this also might be a bigger burst than what I'm giving it credit for. Now the leg and stuff, this might still be blocked just enough to not be able to do much. But we're going to give it just a little bit anyway. Now we have the little rattle, which I think I've drawn it the way it would look. So burst, because it's got individual little pieces, and another burst, and fading into shadow, and then another one, and then into shadow. Great. And he's looking super. Okay, so for his little white fins, or the white on his fins, fill that in. And give it a little bit of a highlight, like we did with the other. Light source would be catching. This side, light source isn't catching so much, so this is all in shadow. And we have his teeth. There's going to be some bursts on the teeth because of, right, the light source is literally right in front of it. So all of these teeth are going to be having a nice highlight from the light source that's right in front of his mouth. Also taking the time to fix the edges of the teeth. But for right now, I'm just doing it in shadow. This won't take long. Just like I did with the body. Whole thing in shadow and then sorting out highlight. Now, come in here and give them a burst. Don't have a lot of space to work with, so the teeth up by the gums will be going into shadow, so the tips will be in highlight. Not really going to be worried about adding shadows on the backside because they're such small wispy things that I don't think I could do it if I tried. But that's roughly what it should start looking like. Plus we're going to be adding a sort of burst of light coming from his hanging light source. So that'll temper some of it too. But yeah, that's really going to show up. I mean, it'll show up less once we build this light up, but for now it should really show up nicely. Same thing on the bottom teeth, right? Just pull it down and fade it off as it gets to the gums. Alright, now I'm going to fade the teeth down here a bit more than up because it makes sense up would have more of a fade to them. To brighten up just a little bit, not fully, just enough. Not quite as noticeably different. There's probably a lot more we can do to dress this up. So I am going to go ahead and give a little bit of this color to the mouth. With the light coming in, there probably would be, right? You'd have just that little bit on the inside. I want to be sure that it's noticeably inside, but descending into the recess of the mouth. So not many lines, just a few. Just enough to kind of give that impression that you can see inside the mouth, not just a black void. There is, like, you know, space in here. Solid, noticeable space. on both sides. Because with this light source, you know, right in front of the mouth, it would be creating that just a bit. But not many lines. Fewer lines, the more, you know, it'll look darker with less lines. And then fading it once you get past a certain point, back in the throat. All the way down in here though. To all of these little recesses. And then all the way up in here as well. Make it a little brighter in some spots so that we can fade it out. Particularly where the mouth is really wide here. And so by lessening out how many lines there are, right, it does create that effect that it's, you know, dissipating. But you have to sort of taper that out. It can't just be less lines because then it starts off looking like there's not a lot happening. It has to start with a few lines like we have here, and then as it goes back it just looks like it's heading in towards a recess. But this is a very light pin pressure. I don't want a whole lot here, just enough. Sort of indicate that there's something here. Noticeably here. Now anglerfish, and I know this from having drawn them before, have teeth back in their throats as well. So I'm probably going to add just a little bit of that because that'll also give it that sense of depth I'm trying to go for right now. And make it look a little bit more, you know, intimidating. Since it's a angler, spider, snake, fish. Same thing down here, like we did above. Light pin pressure, filling in some of these gaps. Give it the impression that there's something here that's going off into like a darker recess. Doing this will also help ground the teeth that we add. It helps, you know, when you have the dark recess, it's kind of hard sometimes to visualize exactly what you're doing. This will help give me the visualization I need to draw more teeth in. Yeah, now we're going to draw more teeth in. Just little clusters, nothing big. Changing exactly where they are, how close, how far, helps give them variety, and how bright they are. Now, this is all light, so I'm just going to put full pin pressure. No need to worry about shadowing because it is a ball of light in his mouth. Or not in his mouth, in front of his face, really, technically. So, after we get this nice and solid and bright, we're going to pull the light, much like we just did with the mouth. The way you can indicate that something's glowing is to taper off the light from that center point, right? We have this nice bright middle point. I'm going to make it nice and white. Really putting in the pin pressure, really filling in the lines. There should be a nice bright center point. And then we're going to take it and start fading it out instantaneously because the brightest point is going to be where it's coming from. But following this line, fading it out like we do with shadows and highlights. Except in this case, we'll be drawing in front of objects we've already drawn. Right? So all of this, drawing in front of all of that. And really just pulling it out. Slowly lessening the pin pressure. We can control how far out this burst of highlight goes. So if we want it closer, if we want it further out, if we want it, you know, that's going to determine, it's going to be determined by what we do here. How far out we push or pull it. I'll pull this over. It's coming out in a ball, so should be a nice good arc around it. And being in front of something will also help give it that illusion that it's glowing. Kind of already looking like that. And then we can just pull it out more or less or do whatever. Right? Because we could stop it here if we wanted to. Trick is to really just not to take over the edge, but to fade the edge so it's harder to see. Right? The more that this is faded, that brighter that edge looks, harder it is to necessarily discern it, and that's going to give it that illusion that it's a highlight, but I want to make sure that the edge is still visible. Despite like really brightening this up, it's clear where the light source is versus where the it's blurry, but it's still there, right? Like there's still a solid section, and then there's this light coming off of it. And the more I fill this light in, the further out I'm likely to push it, because I'm going to fade it out differently than just cutting off this edge. I'm not putting full pin pressure for this, but you can kind of tell the difference, right? Like this is not as bright as the middle. It's still the same color though. So I'm thinking about pulling it all the way to the edge of the mouth, because it likely would very easily reach that point. So if we do that, right, it's coming all the way here and up. It doesn't have to be as thick as the others, because that's how we'll show that it is fading. I won't have as many lines, which will help sort of disperse how some of this looks too. Right, now that we have kind of a general idea, we'll fade this out as if we were fading anything else. Which means as we get further away, we lessen how many lines there are. But the closer we are, we have more, so being mindful of what's where. Now, still pushing it out, but dispersing those lines a bit more. Doesn't have to be all ending very close, just needs just enough to get the sense that it was glowing. So this needs to be what's in front of everything else as I build more layers on. I'll keep that in mind. I'm just gonna brighten up some of this, making sure it fades and makes sense in the way I've done it as well, which is why I'm brightening up this middle point, because it comes out so far and for a while it stays the same, so I want to make sure it's clear that the light itself is fading as it gets further away. No big deal, just a matter of adding a few more lines as we get to some of these outskirts. It would probably work fine the way it was, it's just sometimes I'm a little bit meticulous. I want to add a lot of good details, so and this I think is a great detail. I like doing things like this, because if it's just consistently like a certain color, it's not going to really look like it's fading. And I don't want that to happen. I want it clear that it's fading out. Just debating. I'm going to add some fur color, especially to the legs. Right, so just the same color, just clearly making it fur. I'm drawing, even though you can't see it as well through here, I'm still drawing the fur pattern through here as well. Because we probably will be able to pick up a little bit. Doing it this way may also give it the appearance that the fur isn't as thick, because we have certainly a definitively like drawn and non-furry underbase to it. It'll give it certainly the impression that there's fur. You can see that, right? When we back off, there's clearly fur here. But it might not be it might help it look more like it's smooth, which is certainly a fine, it's a fine thing to do. Because, I mean, I don't know, an angler snake spider might be smooth and just have a little bit of hair. It's a tough call. See it more in the shadows than in the highlights, but you can still see it. So shorter strokes than I was doing earlier, and definitively like hairier. That's all this is. Same thing. Maybe a little shorter as we're getting further away. Be mindful of the fact that our legs are smaller because we're further away. So therefore the fur length is potentially smaller because we're further away. And just sort of, keeping that in mind. I started to do it the same length, but really wouldn't be. It would be shorter at this point. It helps with that perspective. This is further away from us. We've made the legs shorter. That helps with perspective. If we weren't adding fur, it would look perfectly fine. But in order to help maintain that perspective, we probably want to make sure our strokes are also smaller. Our fur strokes are smaller, I should say. So nothing big. That was a little long. Right, nice and short. And then this one, same thing. There's still one other to go. I forgot the one that was closer. But it'll be easier to do that one because his hair length is back to being long again. This one should still be relatively short. That also helps because you don't have to maintain, when you're adding fur or feathers or anything like that, you don't have to maintain this nice perfect line, right? Because you have fur or feathers kind of getting in the way. So, you can see there's not a perfect line and it looks perfectly natural. It makes it look like it's fur or feathers or whatever, it helps add to that. So this can be a little longer again because we're going back to one that's close to us. I think that makes it look a little bit more spider-like, which is good. I'm wondering if I should add some other colors in here. You also have to get the eyes in. I'm going to put this on a different layer. Just a few swipes of hair in various places. Nothing big. Just to give it this sense that, he's got some hair in places. Because of his body. Not his body. Because of his spider influence. But nothing that's overwhelming. I want this nice and small. Fuzzy snake anglerfish thing. Wonder how this would look. I'm gonna just experiment real fast with something. Kind of like what diamondbacks have that pattern plus a white belly for the snake. Is also what I'm doing here. And that adds a pattern to it that I think helps. So that's interesting. So then let's highlight it where there's highlight. And then we'll back off and keep it in shadow where it would be in shadow. And then the belly being white I think can help too. And then probably another one up here, right? Shadow. How do I do that? Meet in the middle, I guess. And then highlight. shadow, highlight right against the base, into shadow, partial highlight. This is definitely shadow, this would be highlight. And this is highlight. Some highlight through here. Have that coming up. And back in here. See how it looks once we get it fully on here. I'll make it a little bit wider. Probably because that's so wide up there. Proportionally, like I was talking about the you know, the fur needs to get smaller as it goes back, so too does any of these highlights. Not quite as wide, but still wider than it is. That one you can't tell how wide it is, so it's fine. This one, make it a little bit wider. And this one, you can't tell how either of these are, but we're going to give it just a little bit. And then this one, oh, I missed this one. This should be in highlight too. Although probably not that wide. And into shadow. And we get into this thinner line. Alrighty. Well, I think that makes it look a little more like a snake. Also going to add a little bit more dark brown to the snake body. I think that might help it look a little bit more like a snake as well. Nothing big, just like a little diamond in the middle of all this. What's also nice about that is it pulls the white through the body. I'm going to add just a little bit to the rattle as well. I don't know that this is the right color. Go a little bit darker. And then I'm just gonna fill it with the darker color. I do think that kind of half shows up. Okay. Now we have the eyes to do. Just debating on adding some highlights using the white right where it would like show up, right, like against this. Which I'm probably gonna do, just see how it looks. Following the contour of something where a body part would be picking up a light, that light source beyond where we could necessarily see where the edge of it is. So just right, pushing this up. It'll give it an extra little like burst of light there. And then against the lip too, just on the inside, we can just follow that line. Doesn't have to be anything big because it's white, so it's, you know, it's going to show up nicely either way. Just kind of gives it that little bit. We'll see how it looks. The lips might be too much. I don't think this is, though. I think that really helps it stand out too, because that's an important part of him. Bringing this down. This will also help hide the fact that I overdrew with the teeth. I won't necessarily have to erase any of that out, potentially. Alright. So we have that line. Yeah, that's making it show up nicely. And then with it coming up, and give it like a little bit of a burst against the eyes on that top edge. Before it wouldn't reach anymore. Maybe a little bit of a burst in here. And on up. But being mindful that this isn't following the light source coming from above and to the right, so it would have a shadow on either side of this thing. It probably wouldn't go much beyond here, because then we're going to start getting into, you know, other, you know, his head's rounding away, things like that, where we wouldn't be seeing it as cleanly. Probably over. Just sort of filling this in. Again, leaving that little bit of a gap. Where his face is getting hit with that light. And making sure that makes sense. Because that'll temper potentially anywhere I've messed up. Because there's two light sources, so if I did one on one side, it's probably true on this one though. Well, it's darker in some places, it's not darker in others. You have a light source counteracting a potential shadow. Yeah. Huh. Boy, he's looking crazy. Alright, so now we have the eyes. What are you? You're the mouth. And I just did you. Okay, so we'll do the eyes. We can do the eyes above that. But I'm putting the eyes under this. So jumping spiders can have, you know, there's several ways I could do this. And I'm debating on it, and I've been debating on it. Jumping spiders have, can have like really pretty eyes if you can see them, but otherwise they'll be black. And I'm just wondering what I should do. I feel like blue would be a nice catch. You would really be able to tell they're all eyes, and that's probably the best thing, because if I just do them with the light flare, you might not be able to tell that they're all eyes. Yeah, we'll do that. Okay, so I'm going to change this to like a grayish blue. And then maybe a little darker. Let's see here. So, want it to look at us. Alright, so wherever the pupils are, I want to make sure it's looking at us. And roughly the same size. We'll take the elliptical marquee tool to help. Same thing with all these guys. Poorly drawn. there'll be 2 points of light coming off. And then just filling in the circles. And we're going to fully fill it in. Guess they're more like ovals, the bigger eyes. I didn't really do them circular. And all of these little guys. A lot of eyes. And not a lot of space on the smaller eyes. Not a lot of space to work with. Doable, still. It's not a ton of space. This should look like they're all eyes, especially once we add the light flare and really make sure that they're clear. Just looks like he's surprised. So we're going to take the optical marquee tool, come in here, make sure that these lines are nice and even on both sides. And then make sure the edges are clean before doing it again. Now we have some clear edges here-ish. Just gonna make sure all these lines are nice and cleaned up. For the most part they are, but you know, some wobble in them where things didn't quite line up, but that's how it goes. Okay. Now, light source coming from 2 separate directions. First of which is above and to the right, which means against the pupil on all of these is going to be a burst of light right over here. So we're just going to go ahead and do that. That's a lot of eyes. These spiders, man. Be potentially less noticeable on this far guy, but we're still going to give it to him just a little bit. Okay. Now, there's also the burst of light that changes depending on where the eyes are, coming from this middle spot. So over here, that's shining up this way, so we're going to have a burst of light against the eye here, opposite of that. Same for this guy, just a little bit. Probably not a lot. Same for this one. And this one. And then for this one, it's going to reverse that. It's going to be up like this. Same for that one. And this one. Really wobbly. And then for this one as well. Okay. Now, so this is going to be in highlight. Edge of the eye is going to be in shadow. Highlight connecting into the other highlights, but fading where there's that gap. There's still going to be the light that comes all the way underneath the eye, as usual. So that's really going to be illuminated there. But that's from the light source that's coming from above and to the right. This is coming this way. There's probably some burst on this side too, which is not usual. Potentially some that inches up into here before fading off. Tell you what, with 8 eyes and to remember what I always call it. And Snyder fish would be able to see really well. Same thing here, right? You're gonna have that light on this side coming all the way underneath, fading out at the edges, and fading out against the pupil where there's no burst. Potentially some highlight on this side as well. And then highlight coming up and over uniquely. With some shadowing on that side. Yeah, and then we're gonna end up with two light flares. One hitting right under here, and then one for the light source above. All right, same thing with this one, right? We have that light source from above to the right, casting this highlight. Not a lot of space to work with the little guys. With the light source underneath, we're going to have a burst on this side, and then a burst above it, going into shadow on the edges, before going into shadow also right through here. Same thing, right? Light coming underneath, all the way under, light probably over here, going into shadow on the edges, probably some light above, before going into shadow up in here. That pattern changes a little bit here, although also we are blocked a bit. Won't catch the light quite the same way. Be a little bit here where you have that bottom casting that light. You would have some here where it's kicking back into highlight. That's from the shadow from the light source above and to the right. And then probably some shadowing right through here. Right, light source above and to the right. This is the shadow over here, or highlight going underneath. With it coming this way, there's probably another little bit of highlight here, and then going into shadow, and going into shadow. All right, we're starting to get into trickier territory where the eye is turning, but we're still going to have that burst of light, or the head is turning, I should say. Burst of light where the, right side, high right light source is coming, goes all the way underneath. And then shadow against the pupil on that side. All the way underneath, going into shadow on the edge. But these would be connecting together. I've backed it off just a little bit so it's not the same full brilliance as the other. Some highlighting here where it's catching that light from underneath. This probably would be just as bright. Going into shadow on the edge, and then shadowing on this back side of the eye, fading it in, so making sure that's not like jarring. All right, and then we have this guy, who's probably more bound by the light source coming from below, which means that light would be over here underneath, be on the side of the light source, so we can't really see that as much, and then the rest of that really going to be into shadow. Now, we have the light flares. First things first, light flare from above and to the right. We're changing this to white. We're going to fill it with the foreground color. Both sides. We want it in the highlighted section. Edit, fill, foreground color. Alright, so that's the first one. Now we have all these little ones to go. We have this guy. It'll be a little smaller as we get to the smaller eyes because they're, eyes aren't as big to be able to handle that kind of highlight. Want it roughly in the same spot on all of them though. Fill, foreground color. Take this guy. We're going to do the same thing over here, but we're going to make significant adjustments to it. We're going to do it, but it might not even be there, so I may end up erasing that. And then these guys, we're going to do even smaller. A little rough roughly in the same spot though. Foreground color. Foreground color. Foreground color. This one, again, it's going to make some adjustments to it, but we'll do it. And then we'll trim. Fill, foreground color. All right. So, to trim it, I'm going to take the lasso tool. Right? This is blocking some of that. So I'm going to follow the shadow line down and erase. And then here, this is going to be significantly blocked by his face. But I will leave a little bit in place. All right. So that's one light flare, but now they have this one too. So this one's coming from underneath. So we'll have a little one here. I want to make sure it's where the light source would be hitting. So right down in here. So let it fill, foreground color, drag it over, same thing. I want to make sure it's right where that would be hitting, pushing into the pupil just a little bit. Fill. Okay, that's the first set. Second set are these little guys. Go even smaller. Fill, foreground color. This one, no qualms about it. Fill, foreground color. And then we have, although I may still make that one smaller. Then we have these little guys. Fill, foreground color, and these are moving, right? Based on what's catching and where. And this wouldn't have qualms about that same spot, but I don't think it would push into there anyway. Fill, foreground color. Just making sure. See, I would move this. That is lined up. This one's now lined up. This one is lined up. This one lined up. I might move you a little. Okay. That I'd say is lined up. This one might move you too. Okay. Oops. And this one, I think I am also going to move and then erase some. Okay. Just like we did with the others. So we'll take this and we'll erase some of it. His face would potentially be blocking it anyway, so. Okay. Where he's turned just that little bit. I'm actually going to make these a little smaller. I don't want them to be as big or as dominating as the bigger one. I want it to be clear that it's a smaller point of light. I'm happy with the way the others are, just not as much with these two. That's why I keep fiddling with it. Something about it isn't looking right to me, potentially because I usually don't do 2 points of light like this. But the little ones are looking fine. It's probably okay. Yeah. I think that works. There's an Snyder fish. Anglerfish mixed with a snake mixed with a spider. Alright, so that is how you combine 3 separate animals that have nothing to do with each other all together. And sort of different elements within that were really kind of fun to do. So I hope that's helpful. In the floating nether next to me, I have other videos of art tutorials I have done, and I will see you all soon. Thank you so much. Take care.